I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life. Each time somebody looks at me like I'm making it up, so I stopped telling it for a while. But you asked, and I figure it's better somebody hears it before I'm gone. My name doesn't matter much. What matters is that I was there, in the Hall of the First Crown, on the day a human being ruined about 9,000 years of galactic history with a single quiet question. Let me start from the beginning, the real beginning. You have to understand what the Veilthai were, not what they told everyone they were, what they actually were. They ran the eastern arm of the galaxy the way an old family runs a town, politely, firmly, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never once being contradicted. Nobody argued with the Veilthai. You just didn't. Not because they'd hurt you exactly, but because they had a way of looking at you that made you feel small, like you'd shown up to a formal dinner wearing work clothes. I worked cargo back then. Still do when my hip lets me. I hauled ceremonial goods, art, relics, the fancy stuff that governments trade to remind each other how old and important they are. That's how I ended up on Veilth Prime in the first place. My ship was carrying a shipment of memorial stone for their big anniversary, and the schedule left me 3 days stranded on the surface while they unloaded. 3 days, on the crown world of the oldest civilization anybody could name. I figured I might as well see the sights. The Hall of the First Crown sits at the top of a mountain that isn't a mountain. They built it, the whole thing. A structure so tall the clouds break against its middle, and the top pokes out into thin, cold air where the light comes in gold and sharp. You take a lift up through the body of it, and the lift alone takes 11 minutes. I counted. 11 minutes of rising through polished dark stone with veins of something that glowed faint blue, like the walls were breathing. I remember the smell most. Cold metal and something floral, some incense they burned that got into your clothes and stayed there for days. Sweet, but not comforting. It had an edge to it. The hall itself, I don't have good words for it. Imagine a cathedral, then imagine that cathedral was embarrassed by how small it was and decided to become 100 times bigger. The ceiling went up so far I lost it in shadow. Rows and rows of tall, narrow windows let in blades of light, and dust hung in those blades, turning slow. There were guards everywhere. The Veilthai Honor Guard. You've maybe seen pictures of them. Pictures don't do it. They stood 2.5 meters tall in that ceremonial armor, silver-white etched with storyglyphs from collar to boot. Their faces were long, narrow, pale as bone, with those big dark eyes that didn't blink the way ours do, they blinked sideways, a membrane sliding in from the corner. When you're not used to it, it makes your skin crawl a little. They held these long ceremonial staves, part weapon and part flagpole, and they did not move. I mean, they did not move. You could stand and watch one for 10 minutes and not catch a breath, not a twitch. And in the center of the hall, on a raised dais under the biggest blade of light, sat the thing everyone came to see. The skull. They called him Emperor Vaskal the Undivided, first of the crown, the one who united the scattered clans 9,000 years ago and started the whole long story of Veilthai greatness. Every child on every Veilthai world learned his name before they learned to walk. He was the beginning, the root of the tree. And his skull sat there under a dome of clear crystal, lit from below so it seemed to float in gold. Now here's the thing nobody tells you until you see it. The Veilthai don't look like us. I said their faces were long and narrow. Their heads in life are shaped different from ours, taller in the back, the jaw set differently, and their teeth, when they show them, are small and even and blunt. Herbivore teeth mostly. They eat these dense purple grains and soft fruits. They're not predators. They'll tell you that themselves proudly. We are the peaceful root of the galaxy. We did not rise through violence. We rose through wisdom. That's carved into the wall of the hall, actually, in 40 languages. We rose through wisdom. I stood in front of that skull for a long time, longer than I meant to. There was a crowd, pilgrims, tourists, a school group of little Veilthai in matching robes being shushed by their teacher. Everybody spoke in whispers. It was that kind of place. And I stood there looking at this ancient relic under its dome of light, and I felt what you're supposed to feel. Smallness, awe, the weight of all that time. But something itched at me. I couldn't say what. I've thought about it a lot since, and I think part of me knew before my brain caught up. You know that feeling, when your eyes see something wrong before your mind admits it. I didn't figure it out. I want to be honest about that. I'm not the hero of this story. I looked, and I felt the itch, and then a guide came by talking about the emperor's wisdom, and I let it go. I moved on. I looked at the tapestries. The one who figured it out came the next morning. Her name was Renner, Dr. Ellis Renner. I didn't know that at the time. I learned it later, when the whole thing was in every news feed in the sector. At the time, she was just a human woman standing near me in the second-day crowd, maybe 50 years old, gray coming into her hair, wearing the plain gray-blue of a xenoarchaeology field team. She had a stylus tucked behind her ear and a tablet under her arm and the specific tired look of somebody who'd been on a dig for months and hadn't slept in a real bed in longer. There were only a handful of humans on Veilth Prime. We're new to the galactic scene, we humans. New and small, and to the Veilthi, a little embarrassing. They tolerated us the way you tolerate a loud child at a nice restaurant. Renner was there on some kind of academic exchange, a courtesy invitation, the kind you extend to lesser peoples to show how gracious you are. I ended up next to her by accident. The crowd bunched up near the dais, and I found myself shoulder to shoulder with her, both of us looking up at the skull. She was very still, stiller than the tourists. She had that look people get when they're actually seeing something instead of just standing in front of it. "You a scientist?" I asked her, quiet so the guards wouldn't turn. Humans stick together out there. You end up talking to strangers just because they've got the same face as you. "Archaeologist," she said. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were moving over that skull back and forth, slow and careful. "Bioarchaeology." "Bones mostly." "Bones," I said. "So this is your kind of thing." A little sound, not agreement, just noise while she thought. And then she got very quiet and very still, and I watched her face change. It's hard to describe. The tiredness dropped off it. Something sharpened underneath. She leaned forward a little as far as the barrier let her, and she stared at the skull with an intensity that made me nervous, and I wasn't even the one being stared at. "What?" I said. "Do you see the teeth?" she said, very soft. I looked, yeah. "Look at the teeth." I looked at the teeth, and I felt that itch again, the same one from the day before, stronger now because she'd pointed at it. The teeth. In that long, pale Veilthi skull and that jaw shaped all wrong for it were teeth. Human teeth. I didn't know it then. I didn't have the words, but I saw what my eyes had been trying to tell me the day before. Those weren't the small, blunt, even herbivore teeth of a Veilthi. In the front, where a Veilthi has those neat little grazing teeth, this skull had incisors. And on the sides, canines, pointed ones. The teeth of something that tore. The teeth of something that hunted. The teeth of a predator. I want you to understand the position we were in. Because what happened next was not a small thing, and it didn't feel small even in the moment. You did not question the Veilthi. You especially did not question them about the Emperor. That skull wasn't a museum piece to them. It was closer to a god. Pilgrims came from 1,000 worlds to stand where I was standing. There were guards 10 feet away who could have folded me in half. And here was this tired human archaeologist, a guest, a courtesy invitation from a species the Veilthi thought of as clever animals, staring at their most sacred relic and seeing something wrong with it. She should have written it down. That's what I'd have done. Written it down, taken it back to her people, published a careful paper years later with lots of hedging language. That's the safe way. That's the smart way. She didn't do that. There was a docent nearby. That's what they called them, docents, the keepers of the hall, priests almost. This one was old, tall even for a Veilthi, draped in the deep red that marked seniority, with story glyphs tattooed right into the pale skin of his face. He'd been giving a small talk to the pilgrims about the emperor's wisdom, his gentleness, the peaceful founding of the crown. Renner raised her hand, like a student, polite. The old docent stopped. He looked at her hand the way you'd look at a bug that had landed on your food. Then, because there were pilgrims watching and the Veilthai are nothing if not conscious of an audience, he inclined his long head, graciously, granting the animal permission to speak. "You have a question, guest." His translated voice came out of the little disc on his collar, smooth and cool. The whole crowd was looking now. The little school group, the pilgrims, me, I wanted to be anywhere else. I remember thinking very clearly, "Don't do it, lady. Whatever it is, don't." She did it. "I do, thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, just steady, and it carried in that huge, quiet space. "I study bones. It's my whole life's work. And I was hoping you could help me understand something about the emperor's skull." "Of course," said the docent, warm, indulgent. "The first crown is a source of endless understanding." "Why does it have human teeth?" I have never heard a silence like the one that followed. You know how a room goes quiet? This wasn't that. This was the quiet of every single person deciding at the exact same instant that they had not heard what they just heard. The pilgrims, the school group, the teacher, me, all of us pretending in one shared held breath that this human had not just said what she said in front of the emperor's skull. The docent's face did something, just for a second. That sideways membrane came flicking across his eyes once, twice, fast, and I understood later that this is what they do when they're rattled. It's a tell, like a person blinking too much. "I don't understand your question," he said. The warmth was gone. "It's a simple question," Renner said. And here's the thing, she wasn't being cruel, she wasn't smug. She said it the way a doctor tells you something you don't want to hear, gently, because it's true and you need to know. The emperor's front teeth, they're incisors, and the ones on the sides are canines, see the points. Those are the teeth of a carnivore, a predator. Your people are herbivores. I can see it in every other Veilthai in this room, including you, sir. Flat teeth. Grazing teeth, but not him. She nodded up at the skull. His teeth are built for tearing meat. So either the emperor was a different species from you, or your people used to be something very different from what you are now. The docent didn't answer right away. And in that pause, that long, terrible, telling pause, I looked around the hall and I saw the honor guard. They had moved. I told you those guards didn't move. Not a twitch, not a breath. Well, now every single one of them had turned their long, pale faces toward the dais, toward Renner, slow altogether like a field of grass bending in the same wind, 2.5 meters tall, silver-white, staves in hand, and their dark eyes were on the human woman who'd asked the question. That's where I'll leave the first part. Because what happened next, what the docent finally said, and what the guard did, and what we found out was buried under 9,000 years of we rose through wisdom, that's the part nobody believes. But it's true, every word. I was there. So the guards had turned, all of them, and the docent hadn't answered. I want to tell you I did something brave in that moment. I didn't. I stood very still and I looked at the floor and I did the math on how fast I could get to the lift. That's the honest truth. When 40 armored giants turn to look at the person standing next to you, the animal part of your brain doesn't care about history or truth. It cares about the exits. Renner didn't move, she just waited. She'd asked her question and now she was waiting for the answer, patient, the stylus still behind her ear, the tablet still under her arm, like she'd asked a colleague to pass the salt. The old docent finally spoke, and what he said surprised me. "Come with me," he said, quiet, not to the crowd, just to her. The pilgrims started murmuring then, a low, nervous ripple, and the docent raised one long hand and the murmuring stopped like he'd cut a wire. He said something in the Veilthai tongue fast, and the honor guard turned back to face front, all together, that same field of grass motion in reverse. The talk was over. The hall was closing early today. Please make your way to the lifts. Thank you for your devotion. They filed out, all of them. The school group, the teacher throwing one last look back over her shoulder, the pilgrims disappointed and confused. I should have gone with them. I meant to. But Renner caught my sleeve, just 2 fingers on my sleeve. Stay, she said under her breath. I want a witness who isn't one of them. And God help me, I stayed. The docent led us to the base of the dais, right up close to the crystal dome, closer than any pilgrim was ever allowed. Up close the skull was worse. You could see the teeth clear as day now, and once you'd seen it you couldn't unsee it. That long alien skull with a predator's grin set into the front of it. It didn't match. It was like seeing a gentle old grandfather's face with a wolf's mouth, wrong in a way that reached down into some old part of you. 2 guards came with us. They stood at the edge of the dais, staves grounded, and they watched, not the skull, us. The docent stood looking up at his emperor for a long moment. When he spoke, his translated voice had changed. The smoothness was gone out of it. He sounded old, tired in a way I recognized, because I'd seen the same tiredness on Renner the day I met her, the tiredness of someone carrying a heavy thing a long way. How long have you known? He asked her. About 4 minutes, Renner said, since I got a clear look, but I think part of me knew the second I walked in yesterday and something felt off. She tilted her head. You knew, though. You've known a long time, haven't you? The docent was quiet. Every docent knows, he said finally. It is the true burden of the red. We are told when we take the robe. We are shown the records that no pilgrim sees. He turned to look at her, and those big dark eyes moved over her face, slow. You are the first outsider to see it with your own eyes and speak it aloud. 9,000 years. A great many clever people have stood where you stand, your own kind included. None of them saw, or none of them dared say. They saw, Renner said gently, some of them. Bones don't lie, and there's always someone in the crowd who reads bones. They just knew what would happen if they said it out loud, in a place like this, with guards like those. She glanced at the 2 silent giants. I'm a little slower on self-preservation than most. Something moved across the old docent's face. It took me a second to place it, because I'd never seen a Veilthai do it before. He smiled. Sit, he said, both of you. This will take a while and my legs are old. There was a stone bench at the base of the dais. We sat. He stayed standing, looking up at the skull, and he told us the thing that his people had spent 9,000 years and untold blood and treasure burying. I'll tell it the way he told it. I've had a lot of years to remember it right. You are correct, he said, that we are not what we were. The teeth do not lie. Once, long ago, before the first crown, before the histories, before we called ourselves the peaceful root of the galaxy, we were hunters. He said the word like it tasted strange. We were fast and we were strong and we were cruel. We tore our meat. We warred, clan against clan, for the joy of it as much as the need. The Veilthai of that age would frighten you, human, and I think you are not a woman easily frightened. We were the most violent thing our corner of the sky had ever produced. What changed? Renner asked. Vaskal, said the docent, the one whose skull you question. And he told us. Vaskal the Undivided hadn't been a wise man. Not at first. He'd been the worst of them, the deadliest warlord of the deadliest age, a hunter king who'd killed his way to the top of a mountain of bodies and united the clans not through wisdom but through terror, the way you unite anything through terror, by making the alternative unbearable. He'd conquered the whole world. And then, the docent said, he'd stood at the top of that mountain of bodies and looked at what he'd built and understood something. He understood that a people built on the hunt would hunt themselves to nothing, the docent said. That the strength which had raised him would, given time, destroy everything he had made. A predator's nature does not stop. It cannot. It turns inward when it runs out of prey. He had seen it. He had caused it. And he decided, this one violent man at the very end of his violent life, that his people would have to become something else, or they would not survive their own teeth. So he lied, Renner said, not accusing, just following the bones. So he began the long lie, the docent agreed. He decreed a new history. He had the old records destroyed, all of them, every carving, every song of the hunter age. He commissioned new ones, songs of a gentle people who rose through wisdom. He made it law. He made it faith. He taught his children that they had always been peaceful, and he taught them to teach their children, and he built the machinery of forgetting and set it running, and it has been running ever since. The docent looked up at the skull. He remade a species of predators into a species that believes in its very soul that it was never anything but kind. It took generations. It took our diet. We were bred deliberately over thousands of years toward the grain and the fruit away from the flesh. It took our stories. It took our teeth in the end. Look at me. Look at any of us. Flat, blunt, grazing teeth. We made ourselves into the lie he told. But not him, said Renner softly, looking up at the skull. You kept his real skull, the one with the hunter's teeth. He forbade it, the docent said. In his last decree, he commanded that his true skull be displayed forever in the highest place at the center of everything, the one piece of the truth he would not destroy. Do you understand the weight of that? A man who erased his entire people's past, and the one thing he would not erase was the evidence of his own. He wanted it seen. The old docent's voice cracked just slightly through the translator. He wanted someone someday to ask the question you asked. And for 9,000 years, no one did. We built the robe of the red to keep the secret. But I have come to believe he did not want it kept. I think he wanted it found. I think he left it here as a test, to see whether his children would ever grow honest enough, or brave enough, or free enough from their own fear, to stand in this hall and say the true thing out loud. He turned to Renner. And it was not one of us, he said. It was a human, a guest, an animal, my people would say. He said it with a bitterness aimed inward at his own kind, not at her. You walked in off a cargo route and you looked at 9,000 years of the most complete lie in galactic history, and in 4 minutes you said the thing none of us could say in 9,000 years, because you had nothing to lose by saying it. Because the truth was just a fact to you, and not the ground under your feet. Renner was quiet for a while. When she spoke, it wasn't what I expected. I don't think it's a shameful history, she said. The docent looked at her. I mean it, she said. You're standing here ashamed of it. I can hear it in your voice. 9,000 years of hiding it like it's a stain, but think about what it actually is. She stood up. She walked to the crystal dome and put her hand flat against it, right below the floating skull, below that predator's grin. My people came up the same way. Every people does. We were hunters, too. We tore our meat. We warred for the joy of it. We were the most violent thing our corner of the sky ever made. We still are some days. We're not done becoming something better. We might never be done. She looked up at the skull. But you're Vaskal, a killer, the worst of you, at the end of a life soaked in blood. He looked at what he was, and he decided his children would be better. And then he made them better, not with a war. With a lie so patient and so kind it took 9,000 years and turned a species of predators into the gentlest people in the galaxy. That's not a shameful history. That's the single most extraordinary act of will I've ever heard of. He hunted his own nature to extinction so you wouldn't have to. She turned back to the docent. The teeth aren't the shame, she said. The teeth are the proof of how far you came. I've thought about that moment more than any other in my long, dull life. Because I watched an old Veilthai priest, a member of the proudest, coldest, most superior species I ever hauled cargo for. I watched him stand in his own most sacred hall and put his long, pale hand over his eyes and weep. Silently. The way people cry when something they've carried for 40 years is finally, gently, set down. The 2 guards on the dais never moved. But I looked at one of them right at him, which you weren't supposed to do, and I swear to you the membrane came flicking sideways across his eyes, fast, over and over. They were listening, all of them. They'd heard it too. I'll tell you quick how it ended, because the slow part's over and you should know. It didn't come out that day. The Veilthai don't move fast. But the old docent, his name, I learned, was Thren, didn't bury it again either. He couldn't. Something had been said out loud in the hall of the First Crown, and it wouldn't fit back in the dark. Thren petitioned the council. Quietly at first, then not quietly. He wasn't alone. Turned out a lot of the red-robed docents had been carrying the same stone the same long way, and only needed one of them to set his down first. It took years. There were people who fought it hard. There always are, when a thing that big gets moved. There were Veilthai who would rather have died than admit their gentle history was a beautiful lie built by a monster. But the skull was right there, the teeth were right there, and once a thing's been seen, it stays seen. They changed the plaque in the end. That was the compromise that finally passed the council years later. They didn't tear down the hall. They didn't burn the songs about wisdom. They just added the truth underneath the old story in 40 languages. Right below, we rose through wisdom. It reads, we rose through blood, and then through one man's will we chose to rise through wisdom instead. Both are true, let neither be forgotten. Renner got a line in the academic record and not much else. The Veilthai never did like admitting an outsider taught them anything. But Thren made sure her name was in the archive that no pilgrim sees, right next to the records of the Hunter Age, and he told me once that in the true history of his people there are now exactly 2 names that matter from that era. Vaskal, who told the lie, and Renner, who ended it. The one who buried the truth so his children could live, and the one who dug it up so they could finally be free. She went back to her dig. Last I heard she was somewhere out past the arm, reading bones, telling some other proud old species a thing they didn't want to hear. That was her whole life, reading the truth off of old bones and saying it out loud gently to people who'd rather she didn't. I still haul cargo. My hip's worse now. I don't go up to the hall anymore, the lift's too much for me, but I went once, years after, and I stood in front of the Emperor's skull with the new plaque underneath, and I looked at those human teeth in that alien face. And I thought about what it takes to look at the worst thing you are all the way with your eyes open, and to decide your children will be better, and then to actually do it patiently over a span of time so long you'll never see the end of it, for people who will never know your real name or thank you or understand what you gave up. That's what that skull is. That's what it always was, sitting up there under its gold light while pilgrims wept over the wrong story. It's not a god. It's not a lie. It's a promise a monster made to the people he was going to become. And it took a human being, a tired woman off a cargo route, with nothing to lose and no fear of the truth, to finally read it out loud. The teeth aren't the shame. The teeth are the proof of how far you came.